The single most pressing questions in ethics is whether values are relative. If they are relative, it means that whatever you think is right for you, and whatever I think is right for me, and there is no way to decide between each set of values if they come into conflict. Objectivism, on the other hand, understands values as absolute, and that each person must be held to account for these values that are absolute. There are two types of relativism. One is descriptive, which just makes a simple claim that there are different cultures and that these different cultures have different moral values. In descriptive ethical relativism, there is no statement of value, just a simple matter of fact. The other type of relativism is normative ethical relativism, and embedded in this claim is a statement of value. Here it states that each cultural claim of what is right unto itself. There are three pillars to relativism, and the first is the diversity thesis. Here the claim is moral beliefs vary from culture to culture or within a culture over time. The second is the relativity thesis, which states that moral beliefs are true or valid relative to some group. The third pillar is the toleration thesis, which claims one should not pass judgment or forcibly change the moral beliefs of other cultures. There are problems with this theory, and the first one is that until we have a better understanding of how to define the limits or boundary of culture, we cannot have a conception of the community to which these moral judgments are relative to. A second problem is a question of what part of morality is relative. Is it behavior? Is it peripheral values? Is it fundamental values? How much of morality is relative? Is it all, most, or some? Finally, what is morality relative to? Individuals, cultures, nations, or groups? So which model applies? Is it that we have distinct cultures today, or do we have an overlap of cultures? For example, you might be an Hispanic, but you are also an American. You might be a Christian, but you are also an American. You might be a Muslim, but you are also an American. Relativism is unhelpful in dealing with overlaps of culture in our media, in commerce and trade, and on the World Wide Web. The challenge of the coming century is precisely in the issues of overlapping cultures. We have the World Wide Web, we have multinational corporations, there are international sports events, and there is international media. Classical moral relativism has its criticisms. Now, sometimes we say that we can't judge other cultures because we can't fully understand them. The criticism here is, do we need full understanding to judge something? For example, do we even have full understanding of ourselves? And if we can't make any judgments, would this eliminate anthropology as a discipline which seeks to find out about other cultures and make judgments? Does it deny a main goal of multiculturalism if we can't make other judgments? Other criticisms claim that moral decision-making becomes arbitrary depending on whether there is a high degree of consensus within the groups, and it makes the notion of moral progress difficult. For example, how is it possible to move away from discrimination, for example, without changing policies? And it always seems to imply that moral reformers are wrong. Now, there are some very good insights regarding relativism. There is a need for tolerance and understanding. There is the fact of moral diversity, and we should not pass judgment on practices in other cultures when we really don't understand them. Sometimes, however, reasonable people may differ on what's morally acceptable. Objectivist moral theories have a different set of criteria. Absolutism comes in many versions and includes this idea of the divine right of kings. But absolutism is less about what we believe and more about how we believe it. The common elements of an absolutist moral theory are: there is a single truth, and their position embodies that truth. Objectivist moral theories come in a variety of forms. One is moral intuitionism, which claims that goodness is a non-natural property that cannot be detected with any of the five senses, but nonetheless exists. Its second claim of moral intuitionism is that persons have a special faculty of intuition by which they can know the property of moral truth. But this raises a serious question. Does intuition simply amount to mere feeling or sentiment? Another objectivist theory is the divine command theory, and this is the idea that God commands what is moral and makes religion the basis of ethics. But there are questions raised here as well. How do we know God's commands? And is something good because God loves it, or does God love something because it is good? If religious authorities cannot agree on what God's commands are, how much confidence can we have in them as a guide for moral conduct? Finally, does subservience to divine command replace the responsibility of autonomy with mere obedience? Another objectivist moral theory is moral realism, and here the claim is that some moral statements are true, regardless of our beliefs or feelings, and that moral truth is discovered rather than invented or maintained by convention. Moral truths are apart from any human perspective. They simply exist. For example, one ought not torture people for the fun of it. One ought not commit rape. One ought not keep other human beings as slaves. There is a middle way, perhaps, between relativism and objectivism, and it is called ethical pluralism or limited moral relativism. It seeks to combine the insights of both relativism and absolutism so that the central challenge is how to live together with differing and conflicting values. And this position recognizes that we might be mistaken in our positions. It also says that disagreement might be a source of possible strength, since checks and balances can occur. With ethical pluralism, there is the idea that there is great diversity, and the 5 primary sources of value in our textbook are going to be ethical egoism, the idea that one should maximize one's self-interest, the idea of natural law, that any action is moral so long as it promotes life, the idea of utilitarianism, that An action is good as long as it promotes the greatest good for the greatest number of persons. An action is moral so long as it respects persons and does not treat persons as a means to an end. And an action is moral as it seeks to develop character. So then there are qualities that we find valuable. Obligations to other people are valuable. Obligations to institutions are valuable. There are constraints on actions that derive from general rights, and general public welfare is also a source of value and might be in direct opposition to rights. Perfectionist ends include intrinsic value of scientific, artistic developments, and there is a commitment to one's own projects and goals. But there are limits to moral diversity because not all differences between cultures are equally justified. Strengths of the moral pluralism, or limited ethical relativism, are that the theory does not give simplistic answers to conflicts between cultures, and we do not have to reject opposing views simply because they are not ours, nor do we have to tolerate them because they are true relative to another culture. Each conflict must be examined on its own terms. We can make sense of moral progress, and moral reformers do not need to be wrong.